on behalf of Sathi Development Services to this short course under Bodhan called the Labor Codes for NGOs and How to Be Ready. This is course which is divided into two parts. This batch is essentially representing not-for-profits, and my duty as again an insider in the not-for-profits, having worked in the not-for-profits from scratch to all kinds of position, is to help you understand the labor codes in simple language and for you and to give you a pathway in terms of how to get things organized well in time uh, during this so-called transitional phase as far as the codes are concerned. So we will talk all which concerns not for profits. So I'm not going to talk here and there something that is not of concern. And let me tell you, these two presentations that I will share with you will be your guide in terms of understanding and taking action in your respective organizations. I want to just mention that the labor codes that have been notified in November are truly transformational in the sense that they will affect not for profit organizations quite dramatically. Okay, I'm not talking of for profits because the for profits have already got used to these kind of changes. But for the not for profits, what has been the major, problem as far as labor laws or social security laws is concerned is a is some kind of a denial. Okay, the denial is whether this act applies to you or not. The one line answer is no. I think there were reasons for this, and as we will see the current laws and the labor codes. Okay, so my presentation is like understanding what the current laws prior to 21st November were, and then how things have changed. Okay, so to the extent that there was denial, and I'm not speaking out of mere, my own thinking process. I am part of this social sector fraternity very in a very engaged manner. So first of all, we will have to get out of this attitude of denial as far as social securities laws is concerned. Second is that the labor codes now will cast additional responsibility both on finance and HR. Okay, so and I can again tell you that HR tended to lean on finance to help with social security, which is not going to be the case anymore. Third is that your resource allocation or intensity of resources in your organizations as far as understanding, documenting, complying, and reporting on labor codes is concerned, that intensity is going to go up. So you please better look at your resources as well as your budgets. Okay. So these are some very specific things that will affect the not for profits. Okay. So that is why I call it transformational for NGOs. And the fourth thing is that there will be no escape route from the labor codes because everything now is digital. Please remember when we went for FCRA, when we then went in 2021 on income tax, we none of these authorities now need to come to us. Actually, we don't even need to see their faces. They don't need to see our faces. But compliances have increased so much that non-compliance, one, the burden of non-compliance has gone up. The second more important thing is that you cannot not comply today, okay? Because everything is digital, there is transparency and accountability, and all departments in due course of next 2 to 3 years are going to speak to each other. So if you think I fooled this department, I didn't report to this department, I think those days are gone. And if that attitude continues, that is a major existential risk for your organization. So I want to flag these points before we do the labor codes. Okay, so on to the presentation straight away. And the layout of the session is something like this. The first point is for all of us to understand that for social security or labor, as it is called, why is compliance so important? The second is what is the overview of the labor codes? And I'll do two codes today, not two, both, not both. Actually, the code on wages, the COW 2019 is what I'm going to do, where we are going to understand before the codes and now after the codes. Okay, how will life change? Because I was first thinking I'll just do action to consider under the codes now, but before understanding what the situation was prior to now these codes, you will not be able to relate to the change. Okay, so some of you who understand some of the laws, I think it's a revision for you. Those who don't, you will be able to then migrate or cross over from the existing laws, and why NGOs said nahi nahi kuch nahi lagta, to why it has to be done. The last point is the code on social security. I think we will be able to only do what are the provisions presently. When I say presently means most of the provisions are not presently. So when I say presently, it means as on 20th of November 2025. But we need to understand, and at points of time when we understand the existing provisions, or as on 20th November, I will also try to give you a lead as to what changes. Okay. So this is how our presentation will be here today. Tomorrow's presentation is on specific changes in the SS code, specific changes in the OSHWC code, and number three, what are the key takeaways from these two sessions. That's the most critical part for the not for profits. Okay. I will also, before we get into the session, also want to make it clear. Please don't get unnecessarily concerned, or frustrated, agitated, or probably trying to do something overboard. Don't do that. I think we are still in the transition phase, and it is very, very important to understand how changes happen. I'm not going to be able to tell you what changes happen in future, but I'm going to able to tell you what you should be doing to see that you finally are able to do what needs to be done in a proper methodical manner. But do you need to do it from tomorrow? I don't think that is the situation. So in terms of an emergency, I would say please don't treat the rollout or the notification of the labor codes as an emergency. The government of this day or the establishment presently tries to do something which is in advance, and then things follow. They take their own time, and therefore we should also take our own time. But it's important to understand all this so that our readiness, our resource intensity, our future business proposal budgeting, and our own kind of setup in terms of our policies, procedures, our kind of other things that need to be done should be thought through, so that you are able to then roll out your plan in a methodical, timely, as well as in a discrete manner. That's the idea. So we all know that we are registered under 12A of the Income Tax Act, and that is the specific section under which we get our privilege as a charitable institution. We are a privileged lot. Okay, and that is what I always say. Why are we put on a separate pedestal versus the rest of the entities? Is because we do social good. Now, the Income Tax Act is the one which gives us the our existence. Not the existence, our existence comes as registered as a society trust, but our tax exempt status comes from the Income Tax Act, which actually gives us that status where our income is not taxable. I'm not saying unconditionally, subject to realization, conditions being complied. People who are here in this group will now understand that even in the income tax law after the FCRA, the kind of compliances that have come and the kind of migration through an analytics that is possible in income tax is the same thing that will happen for all kinds of departments and legislations in this country in the next 2 3 years. So to say, well, ye to dekh lenge is probably the days are gone. So what I'm saying in this slide is basically it says that when you are getting registered or when you are even getting a renewal, all of you, there is nothing like permanent registration now in the income tax as a charitable institution. Your registration might get cancelled, your registration or renewal might not be granted, whatever. And the moment you lose that status, you no longer can continue with charitable work. Now, the act in the Income Tax Act, it says non-compliance of requirements of any other law, which means any other law can also mean labor law, can also mean FCRA. And when we are looking at renewal applications being scrutinized by the Income Tax Department, they are calling for all kinds of registrations. Okay. So what I'm saying is that other laws, and that is why I put this slide, is to tell you that the labor or SS laws is something which is equally critical to save our registration as a not for profit entity. Okay. Otherwise, it can get cancelled. So, other requirements of other laws which help in achieving our objects is something that is a condition that is being inserted by the income tax in the Income Tax Act, and the department is fairly strict. Should I tell you that now when a new company gets registered, okay, then at the time of registration, the EPF number and the ESI number is given automatically, just as you get your TAN and your PAN along with the SIN number or the LLPIN number or whatever it is. So it's as though all the various departments have now got integrated, is what I'm trying to actually say. Now, coming to the labor, so please remember that labor compliances and compliances with the labor code is any other law which actually is important in terms of saving your income tax exemption status. And the income tax exemption status is even more critical than any other registration, not even FCRA, not even anything. That is the make or break state as far as a not for profit is concerned. Now, coming to the labor codes, there are four labor codes, and all of us know that these labor codes have been notified from 1/11/2025 or 21/11/2025. Now, these codes were drafted and were approved and were given presidential assent way back in 2019-20, but because the states did not make rules or took their own sweet time in making rules, the implementation of or notification of the codes was actually delayed. I think a few states still did not make the rules, but the central government said, well, 4 years we have waited, 5 years we have waited. I think it's time that the transformation that we wanted to bring about and the message to the external world that we want to give in terms of labor reforms should be rolled out. And that is why the notification has come. Please remember, these codes are formally notified and all provisions in these codes are effective, which means that if there is anything inconsistent with these codes, okay, with the provisions of these codes, that will be null and void, okay. But because labor is a concurrent subject under our constitution, both the center and the states have to legislate. So where the codes have been notified as central, the central government and the state government are in the process of preparing, get pre-publishing and getting public comments for these draft rules for implementation of the codes. So the codes are more substantive. The rules will actually lay down the procedure and the formats and the tables and the schedules as to how reporting has to be done. Meaning, if I want to have a wage slip, what should be the format of that wage slip will come from the state rules, not from the courts. Okay. So please remember, that is why I said initially, please do not hasten or in a haste take action. The central rules and the state rules, central rules are in draft stage. They are under public comment. They have just been put for comments. The state rules, many of the states have not formulated. Please remember, you will find some state rules which are as old as 2021. However, probably all states have decided that after this notification, they will again publish the draft state rules and then invite comments. The normal window period for comments is about 45 days, and so we have time, okay, until at least the end of this financial year to gear ourselves to how my organization is going to change, okay. And this is going to be different for different organizations. However, we'll have to do our homework to understand where we are and where we want to go. That's the challenge that we have for us in the next 3 months. Okay. The first code is the code on wages. That's what we are going to do today. The second one is on the Social Security Code. Partly the current provisions I will do today, and I am again repeating for people who know the current laws, please don't bother. Let that be a revision. But then when I take you from from the current pieces of legislation to the new codes, that's how the relationship you will be able to understand. The third code is the IR code, the Industrial Relations Code, and the fourth is what is called as the OSHWC, the Occupational Safety, Health and Working Conditions Code 2020. Okay. Now, I just want to mention here that code number three is not something that will concern not for profits. So, the not for profits are not within the purview of the IR code 2020. So, one good thing, one job is over. वैसे ही बहुत माथाफोड़ी है पूरे दिन. At least let the one code go out of the NGOs. So the third code, which is the IR code, unless you are into something which is industry. So when I'm talking of not for profits, I say that the profit motive is not there, is what is the assumption that we are taking. Okay. In which case, we will also still see the IR code very briefly in terms of understanding that this code does not apply to the not for profits, which means code 1, 2, and 4 is what we are going to study. Now, as far as before and life after is concerned, you had 29 laws, and we have been reading about 29. वो तो मतलब याद हो गया है. And so many sections and rules. I'm not putting down the number, but that's been reduced to 4 codes. Now, as far as this is what is important, the three things that follow: registration, license, and returns. This is the major change. And the moment you register, okay, you are under the scanner. आप CCTV कैमरे के नजर में हैं. Okay, that's how change life is going to change. Sorry, I'm saying it very bluntly, and I have no hesitation because I take ownership of you people as not for profit people. So that's how I relate more with you people than anybody else. So the registrations now are going to be one. Okay. Now, this is what is called as the LIN. Okay, just remember it's called the LIN. It's not a new thing. The LIN is a very normal thing for not for profits. It's called the labor identification number. Okay, and the Shram Suvidha portal, which is the Ministry of Labor and Employment ka portal, ssp.gov.in, is where you will get your LIN by filling up the registration form. Okay. So the registration form is will give you one LIN, just as you get your society registration, just as you get your PAN, you get your whatever. Okay, सब कुछ one registration मिलता है. Similarly, you will get your LIN, which is a 10-digit number, which will merge all the multiple registrations. Okay, what does it mean? This LIN is something like the UAN of EPF, where all member IDs will be under that one umbrella. So the LIN will subsume all the registrations, चाहे ना ESI का हो ना EPF का हो. Those all registrations that you have today will be subsumed under the LIN. You will still get a code for your EPF, but within the LIN. Okay, that's what it is. Second, license. Now, this license is when you are engaging people on contract. Okay, so then you'll have to take a license. So this license is for establishment who are engaging contract labor more than a certain number, or contractors who are providing manpower. They will need to get this license, and this will be valid for 5 years at a time. Remember, everything the government is doing has an expiry date. Now, that is, what does that mean? That means that if our compliance up to the expiry date has been poor, the chances of getting a renewal of that particular thing becomes very, very tough. The third one is returns, and this is also one return. It's an electronic digital return on the portal. Okay, no paper business, no nothing business. Okay, now you can understand that if there's one registration and one return, The information in the return will help the department to easily identify whether any of the chapters of the code have been complied or not. Very, very easy. ओके, सो आपको समझ आ जाना चाहिए कि एक रजिस्ट्रेशन है, उसके भीतर में अगर हमने ईपीएफ का रजिस्ट्रेशन नहीं करा रखा, लेकिन जब हम रिटर्न भरी 20 आदमी से ज्यादा की रिटर्न भरी है, देन ऑटोमेटिकली दैट रिटर्न विल ट्रिगर दैट देयर इज नॉन कंप्लायंस इन टर्म्स ऑफ ईपीएफ और एनी अदर लॉ. जस्ट टू गिव यू एन एग्जांपल. Okay, the next one is what is called as composition of offenses. It's also called compounding of offenses. Means that if you have committed an offense in good faith, the government says we will not penalize you full 100%. We will, for the first offense, penalize you between 50 to 75%. Okay. But no further compounding will be allowed for a period of 5 years after a compounding has been given. So you people who work on FCRA know there is compounding of offense. Who work on IT income tax know there is compounding of offense. और ये समझ लीजिए, bureaucracy has moved from FCRA to income tax and now it has moved to the labor department. So you will find similar kind of that framework that is getting developed, and that framework the government has understood for other laws has been very, very effective. Nothing has to be done. They have to only sit in their office, you have to sit in your office, and nobody meets nobody. Okay, so one is the composition of offenses, but subsequent offenses can be compounded only after a gap of 5 years. Subsequent offenses will have higher penalty. Okay, and improvement notices. So, that people have been talking about what is called as the inspector cum facilitator model. Now, the inspector cum facilitator model is the facilitator part is what I call as improvement notices. So once the department checks your returns and your compliances, they can share improvement notices with you saying, please improve, otherwise you will have penalty. So that is the kind of hand holding that the government is looking at. Whether it happens or not, I'm not very sure. But what I'm saying is that there is an intent to help rather than just be a policeman, because until now it was an inspector model. Now it is an inspector cum facilitator model. The inspection mode is through web based or digital inspection. So your digital inspection will happen through your returns and through your registration. Nothing more is required. Okay. Today, if you have inspection for your renewal of your 10 or 12A license, they just send a notice to you saying we want all this. Don't have to come. If you want to come, you come. But if you are weak, then you will go. If you're not weak, strong, you will just submit those papers on the portal and wait for the result. This is exactly what's going to happen. As far as grievance redressal is concerned, the government is looking at the UFC, the Unified Facilitation Center, as a single window for grievance redressal. So that is also a very major change compared to the kind of tribunals and the courts where litigation used to happen. So one idea is not only compliance but also reduce litigation. Okay, penalties are going to be very, very high. So this is the broad framework of what the labor codes look like. So what happens is you go in for an LIN. If you already are registered under some of the registrations, those get subsumed through a deemed approval under the LIN. And the LIN is something which the department has and knows whether you need to have all the registration, you need to have all the compliances, and your return will say whether you have complied or not. कुछ नहीं चाहिए इससे ज़्यादा. Okay, so that means that life is going to be much, much more challenging. Now, what changes under the labor codes? Two, three, 4 points I want to make, and that's reiteration basically. One is it consolidates labor laws. Second, it makes the labor laws more contemporary. Okay, why? Because if you see labor laws, some of the laws are more than 100 years old. British Raj ke laws hain. Okay, so they do not serve the needs of labor today and the complexities that are there of work today. So there is this need for change. Okay, and therefore need for more contemporary, more simplified, more rationalized. Okay, more, laws to be there. The third thing is universal coverage. So I want to I want to caution not for profits. Universal coverage means universal coverage, except where specifically exempted. Okay. If you have an exemption, then you are entitled to not comply. But to say, well, this does not apply, यही मैं सुनता आ रहा हूँ इतने सालों से from not for profits. That universal coverage is a reality unless there are exemptions. So if exemptions are not there, please do not assume it does not apply to you, because the definitions, because the next line I'm saying is uniform definitions, uniform interpretation, and uniform implementation across all matters of labor. Now this is the biggest change. So the code on wages, the SS code, the OSH code, and the IR code, they are all talking to each other in the same language. अलग अलग नहीं है आज तक. पेमेंट ऑफ वेजेस एक्ट, मिनिमम वेजेस एक्ट के अंदर वर्कर एम्प्लॉय वेज की डेफिनेशन ही अलग अलग थी, let alone other laws. Okay, so that difference is not going to be there if we are categorized as an establishment, as a not for profit. Our definition of establishment will be consistent and uniform throughout the codes, throughout all chapters in the codes. So all these codes, all these laws under the labor codes have now got, collapsed in the form of chapters. Okay, chapters in the, so the ESI or the EPF is a chapter in the code. The use of technology or digitization, that I cannot emphasize more because it's brought transparency and accountability both for establishment as well as for regulators. Okay, so if you talk of income tax these days does not harass you if you are on the right path. This is very, 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 very big change that has happened. The regulator will accept your point of view as long as you are able to convince and you are truthful. So that regulator and establishment both will be covered for transparency and accountability, because everything is digital, everything has an archive. The next one is enforcement. Because everything is digital, the enforcement will be much, much more effective. We call it the web-based audits. The department is also going to engage third-party auditors to also audit. And therefore, please remember the use of analytics, which has started, the use of portals migrating information and being able to share information. That's all going to happen. Stricter penalties for non-compliance. Oh, so, 200 rupees and you get away with everything. That thing is gone. I mean, there is both monetary penalty of 1 lakh rupees, generally 50,000 to 1 lakh rupees or more, and there is also prosecution in terms of imprisonment. So while ease is being done, the compliances, non-compliances, the burden of non-compliances in terms of penalties is much, much more. So the inspector cum facilitator model, I have already told you, the composition of offenses and improvement notices are all for effective enforcement. The ultimate goal for these labor codes is ease of business. Now I come to the code on wages, and here the code on wages subsumes 4 acts. Okay, so we are now doing the codes. Okay, and here the format for my presentation is, first I will tell you what are the provisions prior to 2111, and then we will go to the post 2111. Please also remember that nothing, at many places nothing has changed. So if some points are coming as फुल एंड फाइनल 2 दिन में करना है, तो वो फुल एंड फाइनल 2 दिन में करना है, नया प्रोविजन नहीं है. इट्स एन एग्जिस्टिंग प्रोविजन. ओके, सो यू हैव टू अंडरस्टैंड where things have changed. But yes, because we might say, well, the Payment of Wages Act does not apply to not for profits, we are not bound with full and finals. That attitude has to change completely. Okay, so that is something that I just want to say. So as if the codes have changed everything that was there in law prior to 21/11/2025, the answer is no. The answer is no. So we have the Payment of Wages Act, the Minimum Wages Act, the Payment of Bonus Act, and the Equal Remuneration Act. Okay. Now, so we'll see what these 4 acts were like in one slide prior to 2111, और वहां से जाके देखेंगे कि 2111 के बाद में ऑन 2111 क्या चेंज आया. सो आई हैव पुट दीज four acts in one slide. Now, I'll very quickly do these four acts, the one that we have seen, which are now subsumed under the Code on Wages. The MW Act जो था, that was applicable to scheduled employments. Okay. Now, what scheduled employments means is that the center and the states, they had identified scheduled employments, and that was the annexed to the orders relating to on whom the minimum wages will be applicable. Now, in most of the states, not for profits or charitable institutions were not categorically covered under scheduled employments. Okay, and therefore we said minimum wages act हो गया तो ठीक, नहीं हो गया तो ठीक, because we were not clearly uh, we were not clearly, I think we have crossed 80, which means there are more people than 74. Okay, it doesn't matter. The more the merrier. All right, so doesn't matter. What I'm now saying is that प्लीज रिमेंबर, सो क्या चेंज हो रहा है वो भी मैं आपको लीड कर रहा हूँ इसी से, इस स्लाइड से. So the MW Act was for scheduled employments, and most states, including the central government, did not specify charitable or non-profits as a scheduled employment. They might have generally said anything which is in the nature of business, trade, occupation, but not specifically covering. So not specifically covering us. Okay. So now what happens is this word scheduled employment has been removed. And please remember, the one word that works in the codes is what is called as establishment, which clearly includes not for profits. Okay. So we have to always look at two words now in the codes which are consistent, except some confusion, which I'll also refer to. One is establishment and one is employee. There is no confusion now. Okay. So there's no confusion. There's no confusion. So here what used to happen is, because scheduled employment and we were not in scheduled employment, we said MW Act doesn't apply to us. Here the center and the states used to fix minimum wages. Okay, and the states were not bound by the minimum wages set up by the central government or revised by the central government, revised once every 5 years. So what used to happen was there was a lot of migration, because more progressive states were giving more higher MW and rates, and the low and the less progressive rates were not able to match up, and therefore labor used to move from one more less progressive to more progressive state. That will also change. So there are time or piece rate for four category of workers: unskilled, semi-skilled, skilled, and highly skilled. That kind of thing is again retained, and based on the cost of living and skill set. Now they have added something more also. Now lays down provisions on equal wage, working hours, and rest and overtime. Now, if you see working hours, rest, and overtime, that has been shifted to the OSHWC code majorly, where that is where we will see. So please also remember that some of the acts, some of the provisions in the erstwhile acts have also been moved from, the subsumed act to some other code also. Okay, so be careful about that. As far as the POW, the Payment of Wages Act was concerned, again, it made the employer responsible for payment of wages in specified industries. Again, while generally not for profits were considered as responsible employers, they were always not covered under specified industries. Okay, so therefore, again, in terms of compliance, non-compliance, whether if we were able to catch hold of them was problematic. So again, I want to say that the Payment of Wages Act was for payment of wages in specified industries, maybe railways, maybe plantation, maybe factories, things like that, for timely payment. Now, the act then, before the merger with the code, had two slabs. 7th of the following month for up to 1,000 people, employees, and 10th for more than 1,000 employees. That has been standardized. The threshold for coverage in terms of ensuring payment of wages was 24K. Okay, was all remuneration, that is gross wages, or up to 24K, the payment of wages had to be ensured. This threshold has been removed. Fixation of wage period that continues, deductions that continues, mode of payment it continues, wages payout on termination, as I said, that continues. The only thing is people have taken out some provisions just to get that extra masala, and I will not bring that masala because I want it to be as normally understood as possible. However, please remember that the payment of wages chapter is also equally applicable to not for profits. Grievance redressal, that's all right. Now the payment of bonus act, here I have said profit is the basis for applicability. So you can easily understand if profit is the basis for applicability, मेरे पे applicable नहीं होना चाहिए. But still, I want to say yes, you are absolutely right. The PBA is not applicable to, we are exempt from PBA. Okay. And how? We will see that in the specific chapter. So happy. Okay, PBA is not applicable. So as I always have said, if something is not exempted, treat it as applicable is what the guiding principle should be. Now here the PBA is not applicable, but anyway, 20 employees, wage threshold is 21K and the minimum maximum is 833 and 20%. The 21K is again something which the state governments will have to decide and things like that. And the 7K is the basis on which this 8.33 and 20% min max has to be decided based on the profit, okay, the surplus. This is what is called as statutory bonus. So when you read statutory bonus, please understand that this is coming within the purview of PBA. This is not discretionary bonus. So people who are not covered, who go beyond 24K, the company or the for-profit entity will bring them within the discretionary bonus provisions, which is not a mandatory requirement under PBA. The Equal Remuneration Act, nothing much has changed except that the act has not been subsumed in a separate chapter. It is only one section in chapter number, I think, chapter number 2. Equal pay for equal work, no gender discrimination, recruitment, employment, promotion, training, etc. And I think because there is no specified word like a scheduled industry or specified industry and says it covers all employment, therefore we have been generally compliant. Otherwise, also by virtue of the fact that we want equal treatment for all genders, we have been including this in our HR policies and our HR manual precisely because the Equal Remuneration Act did not specify specific industries. Okay. Here, the women employment in hazardous work was prohibited. Please remember, this is changing. This has changed. So, women workers in hazardous work is something that is now possible, but that's been moved to the OSHWC code. We will see that. अब आती है बात कर so मैंने आपको I have told you what these four laws are which get subsumed. The MWA Act applies to us now. The PWA Act applies to us. The PBA doesn't apply to us, and the Equal Remuneration Act was already in. So now when we come to the chapter layout in the codes, I have only marked two chapters, chapter number 2 and 3. Okay, this chapter, these two chapters define all that is needed for a not-for-profit. The payment of bonus, not applicable. Advisory boards is more administrative. So please remember in each of the codes, the state and the center will set up advisory boards, and those advisory boards will frame further standards or further procedures. Minimum wages, national and the state advisory boards, national advisory board will decide on matters relating to wages. So similarly, you'll have the SS code ke andar, the organization structure, and the OSH code, also the OSH advisory boards. So they are all going to lay down procedures, mechanism, fixation, things like that. So just don't jump. Payment of dues, these are all more, more to do with inspector cum facilitator offenses and penalties. I'm not going to do these many of them. So we go to the very substantive provisions in the code as far as code on wages is concerned. First, I will want to make you understand when I said establishment, I'm saying NGO is an establishment within the definition of establishment. Now, I'll not do the establishment definition because we will do it tomorrow in the SS code. Because it's more relevant there. But I'm just saying for the sake of saying that the Is word establishment is where we get covered, and everything unless it is exempt is applicable to an establishment. Now we come to a very a distinction between employee and worker. It's very important. Okay. Now I also said that for not for profits, the word employee is what is going to be of meaning. An employee means a person. Please remember, apprentices are not covered. I have a small section at after the codes tomorrow for other SS laws, especially the SNE, the PT, and the Apprentices Act. If we have time, we will do that also. And that will round up a full understanding on labor related compliances and provisions for not for profits. Now, an employee means a person who is employed on wages by an establishment. First, on wages. So there is an employer-employee relationship. Okay, first, please understand. HR Finance Board, you know that there has to be a contractual relationship where the employer-employee relationship is established in an establishment to do skilled, semi, manual, operational, supervisory, सब तरह के लोग, clerical, managerial, administrative, technical. Okay, so supervisory and managerial also are employees. Okay, and they are all uniformly covered now. Don't There's no distinction. But when we come to the definition of worker in the same code, this I have picked up from the code. Okay, it means all those people who are above, except supervisory, managerial, and administrative, but working in industry, in any industry. Now, we are not into industry, and we will see in the IR code what is the definition of industry. But after seeing what is the definition of industry, because we are exempted from the definition of industry, the word worker will not be applicable. But please remember, the word worker does not include a person who's in managerial or administrative capacity. What is managerial administrative capacity? That means decision making capacity. Somewhere where you take a decision, or when you are in a supervisory capacity, means you have a team under you, but your wages are exceeding 15K per month, then also you are not a worker. But for that's for your understanding of the word worker. But the word worker applies to industry, whereas we categorize ourselves as an establishment. And the word establishment is consistently used across all codes. The word employee is used across all codes. There is some confusion in some codes on the word worker and employee, and that is in terms of the provisions relating to annual leave, matlab earned leave, and provisions relating to overtime. So I'll also mention that to you. But हो सकता है, government has tried its level best, but there can be, you know mistakes that can happen. Now all types of employees, whether they are in organized or in unorganized sector, are covered under the code on wages. Okay, so whether you have an organized employment or you are an unorganized sector, they are all covered under the code on wages. Now, I said that when we were doing the Payment of Wages Act, there is no restriction on payment of wages. So the payment of wages applies without a restriction on the threshold of 24K per month. Without that threshold, it covers wages right from rupee 1, and it covers payment of wages in an establishment and not a specified industry. Okay, so which means that the payment of wages means the time of payment of wage, how the wage will be paid. All those provisions are now squarely applicable to not for profits. Okay, and there is no threshold in terms of wages as such. The third thing is the minimum wages. Now, the minimum wage uh, is now going to be still being finalized, as we had seen, by both by the central government as well as the state government. And the national advisory, wage advisory boards will take a call in terms of what should be the minimum wages. But the minimum wages will now, the minimum wages now fixed by the central government will be the national floor wage. Now, what does it mean? The previously I told you that if even when the central government has prescribed minimum wages, the states were paying less than the minimum wages, which was palayan, yeah, migration for work, was what was actually happening. Now, the government doesn't want that kind of, problem to happen. I know of states which are more progressive, and half the state is populated by people who have come from, less progressive states. So that's a major concern. Okay, migration brings other concerns. So the government now says that and for the interstate migrant workers, the ISM SWM, also provisions have been laid, which we will see in the OSH code, where people from other states have come to work. There are specific provisions now that I will tell you. Anyway, just passingly mentioning. So the minimum wages will be fixed both by the central government, state government, no problem. Again, piece rate, time rate, okay, but the word geography has been added. Besides the nature of work, how difficult or how easy the nature of work, what is the skill set required for the work, the geography is also important. Now, the word geography has been introduced deliberately in minimum wages this time, okay, just to address this geographical disparity ka issue. The state governments, so the when the central government will fix the minimum wages, that wage will be called the national floor wage for those category of workers, and the states cannot fix a minimum wage less than the floor wage. Okay, now please remember the minimum wages chapter in the code applies to not for profits. सो अभी तक हम बोलते थे शेड्यूल एम्प्लॉयमेंट में हमारा नहीं आता। अब क्या मतलब है इसका कि आपको यू विल हैव टू एडियर टू द फ्लोर वेज, यू विल हैव टू फैक्टर इन द मैन पावर एट लीस्ट द फ्लोर वेज इन योर बजट्स, ओके, and you will have to see what the revisions of the minimum wages are from time to time. Okay, so the states cannot fix a minimum wage which is less than the national floor wage. The revision will happen the way it happens, and it is applicable to all establishments as against scheduled employment. मैंने वापस लिख दिया है. Okay, and the wage definition, that is the uniform definition of wage in the code of wages, to which I will now come, is what is going to be the wages as far as minimum wages are concerned. So every state, the central government and every state will have to follow the same definition of wages even for minimum wages. ध्यान कर लेना. अब आती है बात जो मेन हंगामा मचा हुआ है on what is called as the definition of wages. It's called the uniform definition of wages. I can tell you these provisions are transformational. Why? Because they will bring such uniformity in our understanding, not now, but after 3 to 5 years, that you will not have to think twice. अभी तो बहुत दिमाग लगाना पड़ेगा. So what is the definition of wages now? And I want 100% attention at this point of time to understand what this word, this animal called wages means actually. Now I'm referring squarely to section 2.5, 2y, which is in the code on wages, chapter number 2, section 2y. What does wage mean? And please concentrate on each word. Wage means all remuneration. I put in bold. All remuneration is wage. So now you will have to start dismantling your thought process of gross salary and CTC and all that. You have to get used to what is called as all remuneration, that is salary, allowance or otherwise. Otherwise का मतलब otherwise means if not in salary or allowance, all is covered, cash or non-cash. So this is the word all remuneration. So the word remuneration is important for us now. Okay, so please remember that. And remuneration will include all benefits. एंड हम अपना दिमाग अब लगाने लग गए हैं कि ऑल बेनिफिट्स तो हम हटा ही देंगे, बेनिफिट्स तो ऑल रेमुनरेशन में नहीं आएगा और ये आएगा और वो आएगा. जस्ट थिंक अबाउट इट नाउ. Expressed in money or capable of being expressed so, meaning both cash and kind. Okay, cash, non-cash benefits both, payable to an employee if he fulfills the terms of employment. ठीक है, यहां तक आ गए. अब हमने ये देखा कि वेज मीन्स ऑल रेमुनरेशन. वेज मीन्स ऑल रेमुनरेशन, बट देन द गवर्नमेंट सेड आई वांट टू से in this all remuneration what is wage, what is the inclusive component of wage, and they said what is the inclusion, that is basic pay, dearness allowance and retaining allowance. So all remuneration is wages, but there is an inclusive component of the remuneration which they have said that we will consider as wage. That's what is called inclusion. Basic, DA, and retaining allowance. Retaining allowance, ये बाबा आदम के जमाने का, again, the same colonial kind of thing. Retaining allowance was for seasonal industries, seasonal work, where 6 महीने काम होता था, 6 महीने सिचुएशंस वर सो हार्श दैट यू कुड नॉट, ट्रेन नहीं मिलती थी, पटरियां नहीं होती थी, आने जाने का साधन नहीं था, तो पीपल यूज टू बी काइंड ऑफ बी retained by the employer by giving some kind of a retaining allowance, because otherwise they'll just run away and next time when the season starts they'll not be available. So that probably is not what is important. Basic pay, DA, is what they have introduced. Now, as far as exclusions are concerned, so in the word remuneration, what will be considered as wages is these three things. That's what is called inclusion into in, and the inclusion is called wages out of the remuneration. Now, what is called as exclusion? That is statutory bonus. We don't pay that. Value of house accommodation and amenities as per government order, again not applicable to us. PF, pension contribution, yes. EPF and NPS, that's exclusion. Conveyance allowance, exclusion, we pay. Traveling concession, LTC, we pay. Sums to defray special expenses given the nature of employment. So sometimes we might give some security, some, hardship or whatever it is, we might give some allowance. Okay. Now, sums to defray special expenses can also be interpreted as some expenses for children's education, or it depends, it's not been specified. But if we are giving some research people, people who do academic work, if we give them books, we give them whatever. So that's something for those special expenses. So I am just putting, things into your head to think what it means. The next one is HRA, वो तो हमारा integral part of our compensation structure. The sums paid under a court order generally not applicable when there's a dispute between the employer and employee. Overtime we generally don't pay. Okay. Although the concept of overtime is now included in the codes in a certain sense. But again, I want to say, as I said, when they talk about earned leave or annual leave and OT related provisions, they are basically talking of this word called worker, and that's what is creating this big confusion. So the next one is uh, gratuity payable, commission. We don't do commission. Gratuity payable on termination. So gratuity is covered. So any payment that we make towards gratuity, that is not included. That is an exclusion. And then there is retirement benefits. So things like earned leave, okay, or any other kind of benefits. We don't give retrenchment compensation. We might give ex gratia on termination. That's discretionary. Retrenchment compensation is covered under the IR code. So since IR is not applicable to us, retrenchment compensation also not. So what is getting covered in exclusions? Point number, so A से लेके और K, these are 11 exclusions in the code, in the definition of wages. So what wages is all remuneration, but what it includes is this and what it excludes is that. Okay. Now, why has this inclusion exclusion been done? Because the government wants to have a balance between inclusion and exclusion, and that balance is so, your point number C, point number D, point number E, point number F, okay, point number I, point number, oh, not I, J, and point number K are your sum of your components of your com structure. Some elements of your com structure besides the basic. ऐसा ही दिखता है ना हमारा स्ट्रक्चर बेस ऑर्गेनाइजेशंस का compensation का. That's what the inclusion and exclusion in this total remuneration has been defined. Now, what they say is that the exclusion of the total remuneration, the exclusion without taking into account J and K cannot be more than 50% of the total remuneration. So we are talking of total remuneration. Okay. अगर total exclusions excluding J and K. Again, please remember, J means gratuity and K means retirement benefits. उनको जब आपको कंडीशनल इंक्लूजन की परिभाषा के डिसीजन को लेना है, which means that if we have to find out what is the exclusion as a percentage of total remuneration, please leave aside J and K and then see whether the sum total of exclusion is less, more, or equal to 50% of the total remuneration. If it is more than 50% of the total remuneration, then the conditional inclusion concept kicks in, which means that the more than 50% of it will have to be added back to inclusion for purposes of social security benefits. If it is less, then it means that the inclusion component is more than the 50% of the total remuneration, in which case also the social security benefits will be calculated at the percentage which inclusion is. So our big job is to see how to balance this inclusion exclusion business such that 50-50, 51-49, uh, the inclusion has to be 50. Okay, the inclusion has to be 50. So the conditional inclusion will kick in only when the exclusion in point number 2 is more than 50% of the total remuneration. The value of remuneration that is given in kind, which is something called like fringe benefits or perquisites, it's more common in for profits. So it's actually not applicable for not for profits. I haven't seen people being given cars or being given some kind of gym subscription, some kind of meal allowance. Those are all fringe benefits. So, but if anything is given in kind, then 15% of that kind amount in value terms, in money terms, will also go to do be added under point number 1, that is inclusion. Okay, so if remuneration in kind is provided, 15% of up to 15% of the wages, okay, that will be added, that will be considered as wages. So please remember that. But I don't think we are normally falling in this category called category 4. So what happens is this that happens. This is how the definition of wages has to be seen. The definition of wages is all remuneration. But then the violet part of it is what gives you the inclusion in the definition on wages. But the entire remuneration has to be considered. And the exclusions are on the orange side, the 11 exclusions that I have just mentioned, A se leke or K tak. And the J and K, which is gratuity and retrenchment or retiral, is the one which I have put in bold. So when we are going to calculate the exclusion to the total compensation, then we will have to exclude this for computation of the 50% test or not failing or not failing. And of course, I told you the 15% kinds. Now, if you see, again, I want to repeat it, and this is very important because unless we understand the concept of wages, we will not be able to look at our wage structure. In the next slide, I'll show you a typical wage or comp example of a not for profit. But please remember, we do not have anything like a dearness allowance because it's linked to COLA, the cost of living adjustment, basically, and we have no capacity to do that. The retaining allowance is, again, I said, something which is irrelevant for us. Okay, the basic pay is something that is important. Okay, but once one component of our comp structure is basic pay, which where there is no confusion, and then the rest of it is all on the exclusion side. Now the big problem is we have seen house rent allowance, we have seen defraying any kind of special expenses that can be looked at. पेंशन फंड में, एनपीएस में अगर आप रजिस्टर्ड हैं तो ईपीएफ में आप तो रजिस्टर्ड होंगे ही. एनी कन्वेंस अलाउंस दैट यू गिव, एनी ट्रैवलिंग कंसेशन दैट यू गिव, एनी gratuity you pay, retiral benefits you pay. They are all exclusions. But the question then comes up is, what if some of my component is not part of this or cannot be, tight jacketed in one of these? Then the answer there is you will have to look at judicial pronouncements or judicial orders in terms of where it will fit best, number one. And number two, is that particular element of your compensation a fixed amount irrespective of the work done, or is it variable? Okay. If judicial pronouncements are saying that this should be added to basic pay, then you can, because there is no clarity, no clarification. I am only telling you that this is how, when you actually assess or revisit your comp structure, you might have to put in some arbitrariness, but that arbitrariness should be, backed up with judicial pronouncements, as well as whether those allowances which are not categorically covered here or cannot be categorically covered here, okay, cannot be fitted we cannot fit them here. Defray expenses because of nature of work, please look at, please be innovative, please apply creativity to see how it works. But this is how you will have to first identify the elements of your current comp structure to this particular slide and say यहाँ टिक होता है और यहाँ टिक नहीं होता. जहां टिक नहीं होता, there is where you will have to rely on judicial pronouncements. Now, if you look at the word special allowance, which is our pet word in the not-for-profits, that special allowance is a fixed allowance that does not have anything to do with our work, with our performance, our productivity, that is given as a fixed percentage generally. Now, the Supreme Court has held very clearly in matters relating to EPF that a special allowance is part of basic wage or basic pay. Now, that's one way of looking at it, because the word special allowance is nowhere there. और आपके सारे questions इसी पे ही होंगे, साहब हमारा special allowance कहाँ जाएगा? Okay, so I am only saying, and again I want to put the disclaimer, I am not wanting to claim that I am the authority, but I am only trying to help you. Now come to an illustration of इंक्लूजन और एक्सक्लूजन को कैसे देखना है और कंडीशनल इंक्लूजन को कैसे देखना है. ये इलस्ट्रेशन है, एक नॉर्मल इलस्ट्रेशन. ये एक फॉर प्रॉफिट का इलस्ट्रेशन है इन अ सर्टेन सेंस, बिकॉज दे आर द वंस हु डू ऑल दिस काइंड ऑफ बिग बिग elements of comp structure. Now if you see scenario 1, just for your understanding, scenario 1, you are seeing that there is, that is on the left hand side is your composition of your, or your, all the elements of your total remuneration, which is 25K. Now if you remove the exclusions, which is HRA, conveyance, overtime and commission, that works out to 11K. Now what our test for exclusion in terms of deciding on whether we fail or pass the exclusion test of 50% of total remuneration is the exclusion not being more than 50%. In this case, they are not. And therefore, on the right hand side, we have taken basic and special allowance as part of our component of wage. And on the conditional inclusion, we have added 0, because with 14,000 rupees, we are safely crossing, or in a way, we are safe as far as the 50% test is concerned or not. And therefore, there is no conditional inclusion. Now, please remember that the benefits will have to be calculated on wages. Whatever you consider as wages is where your SS benefits will have to be calculated. Here, for instance, theoretically 14K, we will have to calculate all our benefits. Now, the scenario 2 is on the other side. The other side says that now my exclusions are 13K. So in that case, I will have to add back conditional inclusion of 500 rupees to be able to make it 12,500 rupees. Okay. And only then I will be able to fulfill the 50% exclusion test. Is it correct? Is it understood? Now I come to a real example of a typical not-for-profit comp structure. वेरी सिंपल इट इज, ओके। बेसिक होता है हमारा, उसके ऊपर 50% एचआरए करते हैं, उस पर 25% स्पेशल अलाउंस कर देते हैं, और 12% ऑफ द बेसिक को एम्प्लॉयर पीएफ कर देते हैं। Sometimes our employer PF is part of the three components, which means the special allowance goes down from 25%. I have made 25% as the basis on the 25% of the basic. I have not reduced the special allowance to the extent of employer PF on basic. Now, they generally, that is what is called as gross salary, isn't it? I'm taking on the most simplest example, the one example that is most common across not for profits. Okay. Please remember, making employer PF as part of gross salary is not legal, but we do that. That's how we make our comp structure. Now, here you will see that after the gross salary, there is this gratuity 4.81% on basic, and the EL that I have taken as 18 days on basic. I mean, just for whatever reason. And this makes our CTC per month as 1,10,871. Now, this is the typical comp structure. This is typical comp structure. Now, I told you that the special allowance being a uniform allowance and is not an exclusion has been considered as an inclusion here. Okay, uh, that's how it is. And by and large, the understanding that has been given is that something which is fixed and something which has judicial precedent in terms of decision making by courts is something you can rely on. So when we are now trying to calculate wages, we are now looking at exclusions. So what are the exclusions? The HRA is an exclusion and the employer PF is an exclusion. Why? Because the gratuity and EL will not be considered for purposes of fulfilling the 50% test. I told you that A to K, J and K will not be considered. Please refer to the definition of wages in section 2Y, and they will not be considered. Therefore, I have not added those exclusions. So the total exclusions become 31K, and the exclusions work out to 28% of the total remuneration. The total remuneration of 1,10,871. This is, there cannot be any very simpler example than that, but this is also very representative of the way wage comp structures are and elements are in a not for profit. Now, 28% exclusion means that nearly, if we exclude gratuity and EL, then nearly 70% is inclusion, and you have SS benefits on 70%. Now, the big challenge is to bring the exclusion up to 50%. Otherwise, your SS benefit will be on 70%. That's the big challenge. Here, the other way around. Okay, because everything is now on the concept of wages, and that's the biggest change. So we have to now see how do we bring the wages. If we were to look at special allowance as an inclusion in the concept on wages, then for most NGOs, the wage currently will be more than 75% of the total remuneration, or even more. So this is what, so I'm leaving this example. We'll come back to this example tomorrow. Okay, जब मैं आपको इसी on this particular example, then plot on the right hand side how life changes, okay, or how life needs to change if we have to comply with the SS benefits. Because when we are looking at code on wages and the definition of wages, we don't have to look at exclusion inclusion only. We have to also look at what is the taxability, what is the take home pay of the employee. Those two considerations are very important. What is the TDS implication going to change? Number one, not much, as my understanding, because those allowances in any way willy-nilly will still be taxed. But the take-home pay is something which we have to be very mindful of. So when we are working on the tweaking or reshuffling of components of the wages, it's not just the reshuffling because of the 50% rule. It's also because of the TDS and the take-home composition or the take-home pay of employees that has to be considered. Because at the end of the day, वहाँ teams को जाके समझाना पड़ेगा. It's not that we will take a call and say labor code में ऐसे था तो ऐसे हो गया. He has to run his house every day, is what I'm just trying to mention. So you cannot look at, tweaking, reshuffling in isolation. That's the point that I'm going to make. Now, with having done the concept of wages, we will come to the same example tomorrow when I will show you how to change this 28% to somewhere close to 50% so that the social security benefits are 50% on 50% and life does not change. The second thing that I did not mention here is it's not just tedious, it's not just take home, it's not just tweaking and 50%, but it's also the incremental cost to the employer because of the reshuffling that I didn't mention. That also is going to be the case. So please remember, all those factors have to be kept in mind. Then comes other provisions in the code. So I'm going to move on from the wages to other provisions in the code. And payment of wages now applicable. If your payment wage period is monthly, you'll have to fix that wage period. You'll have to display that on the notice board. Wage period employer to fix and cannot be more than 1 month. So if it's a monthly wage period, then by 7th of the following month, the payout has to happen. Check electronic method is permitted. It was earlier also permitted. 7th was not is not a new date. It was already there up to 1000, but it's applicable to you now because you are no longer in the category of specified uh, industries. You are clearly an establishment covered under payment of wages chapter as specified, and other methods including cash currency, timelines for daily, weekly, fortnightly. We generally don't do that. The wage period is monthly. Full and final wages within 2 working days for removal resignation. कैसे करेंगे, क्यों करेंगे, कैसे होगा, ग्रेचुटी पेबल कैसे होगी, ईएल का पेमेंट तो वहां से इंश्योरेंस से आएगा जब देंगे. This 2 working days condition was there in the Payment of Wages Act already. Now the intent of the government here is not to punish you when you didn't. आज मैंने अगर मेरे को आपने निकाल दिया 7th को तो मेरे को 9th तक नहीं दिया तो मेरा बहुत बड़ा काम गड़बड़ हो गया. It's not that. What the government is saying is, please put procedures in place that if not 2 days, at least within a reasonable period of 2 3 days, because people did not pay full and final for months. That is the idea. So what I'm saying is that this is not a new provision. It was already there. The intent, the idea is that the NGOs are not now covered there clearly. Deduction from wages, these are specified. And please remember, total deductions cannot, including tax, wax, सब कुछ मिला के, for a wage period, for a wage period. एक एक word आप सुनिएगा with carefully because you will never get this. For a wage period, your total deductions, including income tax, PF, CF, cannot be more than 50%. Okay, there cannot be any unauthorized deductions, and the deductions and fines have been specified in the payment on wages, payment of wages chapter, where they have explained what are fines, how will fines be imposed, what is absence from duty, what is damages to the organization in terms of property and other things for which there is recovery, recovery of advance, recovery of loans, recovery of taxes. Taxes means income tax and other statutory dues. These are explained in code. I cannot explain them here. But what I'm saying is, when you are making deductions, please ensure those deductions are authorized deductions, and the cap on deductions to the total wage for a wage period cannot be more than 50%. Payment of bonus मैं इसको नहीं करता because it's again we know हमें as not for profit, since we are privileged not to have the PBA. The equal treatment of gender. So I'm not going to repeat this all. It's the same thing, wages, recruitment, employment, but this is not a separate chapter. जैसे अगर आप चैप्टर लेआउट देखेंगे तो द इक्वल रेम्युनरेशन एक्ट हैज बीन सबस्यूम्ड इनटू जस्ट 1 or 2 sections इन चैप्टर 1, विच इज द डेफिनेशंस चैप्टर. तो डेफिनेशंस खत्म होने के बाद में एक ही सेक्शन है या 2 सेक्शन है, उसमें उन्होंने इक्वल रेम्युनरेशन एक्ट को सबस्यूम कर दिया. But they say you must have gender inclusion employment policies. So you please ensure that the third gender and policies relating to them is part of your HR policy. Okay. Now, when you are comparing when you are wanting to derive equal remuneration across gender. Okay, then in the wage definition, emoluments or exclusions which comprise of conveyance allowance and travel concession, HRA, overtime, and any award, those have to be added for all genders, all respective genders, to find out whether equal remuneration is being paid or not. This is one of the proviso to the definition of wages. So equal treatment of gender के 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 number का मायने, number means the figure in terms of understanding equal remuneration का क्या मतलब है, has to be computed by computing these components of the of the exclusion of exclusions for understanding whether equal remuneration is being paid or not. Please remember that. Then moving on to more key provisions, mandatory issue of wage slip. Okay, whether it is digital or paper, it has to be issued. Wage slip is a mandatory condition. Now, please wait for the state rules. State rules will specify the format to be used for wage slip. Like if you can go to many of these state rules and the schedules or the form numbers, hopeless, horrible. I don't know, these state rules are nothing but horrible. Okay, the appointment letter format is like you will not even want to keep it. But anyway, I just want to tell you, whatever is your format, you retain the format. Whatever is your pay wage slip format, you retain it. But everything that is mentioned in those format has to be part of your existing template. तो क्या कल मैं appointment letter सारा change कर दूं? You don't have to run, I'm telling you. क्या मैं wage slip जो दे रहा हूँ उसको change कर दूं? Please go to the final state rules in terms of template, and wherever the template has additional information, like in the wage, in the appointment letter, you may have the UAN number of that particular employee, which is not there right now. Okay, you may have the Aadhaar number of that person, which is not there, which might be specified in the appointment letter template in the state rules. So wait for the state rules both for appointment letter, which is part of the OSH code, and for the wage slip, which is part of the code on wages. समझ आ गया? Uniform limitation of 3 years. So earlier, matters relating to wages, the wage, the periods used to be different in different laws, 6 months to 24 months. They said 3 years limitation, if it has crossed, the matter is gone. Okay, and why they have made it 3 years, because they want to give extra time to any matters which may relate to wages more than 6 months to 24 months. But then they are clear, anything where the cause of action has limitation which is prior to 3 years, it's gone. Registers and records on employee day, muster roll, wages, etc. You'll have to display on the notice board the abstract of the code, the category wise wages based on nature of employment, wage period, day, date, time of payment of wages, name and address of the facilitator, the inspector come facilitator, and the jurisdiction. Okay, so please remember this has to be part of it. Now you look, that is part of the code right now. How the rules say stated, do they specify the display language in terms of what has to be displayed? You'll have to work on the state rules. Okay. Uh, Appointment of inspector cum facilitator, I've already told. Higher penalties. So please remember, compounding of penalty is permitted, but once compounding has been given and you have been given an accommodation, subsequent penalties are much, much higher. Much, much higher. Therefore, what this means is, if penalties are higher, our compliances, our level of quality of staff handling the matters relating to labor has to be of that quality. It means that the cost of HR processes, the cost of HR manpower, the cost of servicing this will go up. But digitization will also reduce the amount of work that needs to be done. So you balance out the increased intensity of resources, the quality of resources, with the ability to do things digitally faster. That payoff you will have to calculate and then decide how much resources to deploy for these codes. The national and state advisory boards, as I said, सार कोड के अंदर advisory boards हैं. Now they are getting constituted. They will frame the standards. So wait, look at things as they unfold. Now The PBA, as I said, not applicable. Why? Because the chapter says non-applicability of the chapter. What does it say? Institutions, including hospitals, chamber of commerce, and social welfare institutions established not for purpose of profit. So you are clearly out of the PBA. I have still copied it from there and put it there for your on the from the chapter on PBA. Okay, from that chapter I've put the non applicability. Now actions that are required under the COW. सबसे पहले coverability of the provisions relating to minimum wages, payment of wages. Those provisions will now apply to NGOs. Review your compensation structure for compliance with definition of wages, and I have explained to you the way you have to look at the exclusion, inclusion, conditional inclusion, and your remuneration is the total remuneration, whether wage, whether cash, non-cash. Non-cash we generally don't do, so don't bother. Before reshuffling, refer to the state-specific final COW rules. One, make your all your calculations, and then, but before, allow the state rules to be out on the COW. Okay. In case of ambiguity and the compensation structure ke elements, as I have already said, please refer to A and B. I just mentioned that. Adherence to the national floor wage is something that you please look at. The central government, maybe the National Advisory Board for Wages is going to declare the national wage, the minimum wages for the central minimum wages, which will be the national floor wage. उससे ऊपर स्टेट दे सकता है, उससे नीचे स्टेट नहीं दे सकता, और अगर उससे ऊपर स्टेट दे रहा है तो वो उसको कम नहीं कर सकता. The FNF, no threshold for payment of wages. Okay, no authorized deductions, and deductions not more than 50%, wage payout by seventh, equal remuneration, and focus on compliance. Okay, focus on compliance, focus on documentation, focus on consistent compliance. ये नहीं कि अभी मैं आज कुछ भर देता हूँ. You will get caught. You know, income tax, FCRA, the compliance that you do, the trail is always there in the department. So you will always get caught. So what I'm saying is, when it comes to compliance, your consistency and clear understanding of compliance has to be there. Is this something rocket science? It is not rocket science. It is only the fact that the net of social security has become applicable. The net has been cast wide to not for profits. Now this is all on the code on wages. I go to the code on social security, and here are the legislations that get subsumed. But before we do, what happens in these in the code is, I will like to take you today for the rest of the session on what these four acts look like. Many people might not know what the ESI Act looks like. So it's good to understand the ESI Act because it's going to be applicable. Now, there are five pieces of legislation which are clearly applicable to us here in this uh, laws. All these legislations are now chapters. The ESI Act, the EPF Act, the EPF MP Act, the Maternity Benefit Act, the Payment of Gratuity Act. ठीक है, all the four chapters, and the Employment Exchange Act is also applicable with conditions. Okay, this is basically where vacancy notifications have to be put up through the government. Okay, so these are, but the four that I've put in bold are the acts which are clearly applicable to us. Now, EPF, maternity and payment of gratuity, was something we understood. Many not-for-profits were have also got the ESI registration, and they are complying with ESI registration. And many not-for-profits clearly say we are not covered. Well, you can't say that now. The other acts that get the film wala, journalist wala act, the building and construction, the unorganized workers, that is all specific to specific categories. The Employees Compensation Act will also not apply now to you, because if you are covered under ESI Act, the Employee Compensation Act will not apply, because you, for purposes of occupational disease and occupational injury, for which entails compensation, your entitlement will be covered by ESI. ठीक है, समझ जाओ. And I will take you to the first schedule of the SS code to tell you what is the kind of coverage. Very clear you will become then. But before that, I want to take you through these four acts, जो कि 21 1 to 21 11 2025 से पहले थे. Some of you know those acts. Don't worry. But why I want you to do is just because I want you to then, not only for people who might not know, for them to understand, and for people who know a revision, and also to see how the laws migrate or how the provisions will become different. So I come first to the EPF Act. So I'm going to do today the EPF, the ESI, the MB Act, and the Payment of Gratuity Act. Okay. The EPF Act has three components: the the EPF scheme 1952, the EPS 1995, the pension scheme, and of course the EDLI 1976. All these three schemes are going to be there in the new chapter. Okay, very clear. Okay, so uh, they will now call this EPF MP Act as chapter called Employee Provident Fund. Bas, itna hi hai. Now 20 plus employees, including employees through contractor, if the contractor does not have a specific registration, for establishment specified in Schedule 1. So the EPF Act was applicable to establishment specified in Schedule 1, and we were specified. But there was that the coverage was not universal. The coverage was only to Schedule 1 establishments. Voluntary coverage, if 20 se kam hai, then that was allowed. That is also allowed now. That's what is called as opt-in, opt-in facility. Okay. Now, if you had in-house exempted PF trusts, most of the organizations don't have, then you have to ensure that you have compliances and you probably are giving the same rates. But the in-house exempted trust has still been retained in the EPF chapter. Eligibility, all employees, part-time, full-time, who have worked for 30 days. Okay. As I said, an employee, uh, once an employee, always an employee, and once an establishment is covered, always covered, is what used to be the rule for EPF MP Act 1952. That is not the case now. That may not, that is nahi bolunga, that may not be the case now. Just as you have voluntary, so why I am taking you through this was also to tell you where changes are happening. And then when we will do the code, we might work fast, we might move faster. So the voluntary coverage is what is called as opt-in. But once an an establishment, always an establishment under an MP Act, not necessarily, because the opt-out option is now being provided under the SS code, but with conditions. Okay, that's the change. That's the big change. So flexibility is being given to you. Okay, flexible, while compliances, while understanding, while this, that, all is there. But wherever you think you are a better judge for your organization, the government will not come in your way. The excluded employee categorization, uh, as per the act, still continues, which means if your remuneration is more than the PF threshold ceiling of 15K, okay, then you can be an excluded employee, provided you are also not a member of EPFO. ये दोनों conditions and की condition है. If you are more than 15,000 but you are also a member of EPFO, then you can't be an excluded employee. But for coverability, the excluded and the included employees are covered for purposes of this 20. Uh, Less than 15K, they are all mandatorily covered, in fact. Okay, so that's how the law is. Now, uh, 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 that definition of excluded employees still continues. Please remember, this employee PF and the MP Act 1952 is the only act which has not been repealed. आज भी ये एक्ट इन फोर्स है, बाकी सारे एक्ट रिपील हो गए हैं टेक्निकली. Technically, all acts are repealed except the EPF MP Act. Okay, please remember that. Technically, repeal हो गए का मतलब होता है as long as anything that you do, unless the new rules and laws become properly enforceable, then if they are not in violation of those erstwhile laws, that's okay. So that is why I call it technically they are repealed, although they are still in force in a certain sense. That is something that you have to understand. But the EPFMP Act has not been repealed. That is what I just want to say. Because there's a huge area around EPF Act, but if it gets repealed. Now, EPF scheme, we all know this 12% on basic DA plus retaining allowance. And this is where I want to tell you that the courts have held that EPF is applicable to fixed allowances. That the fixed allowances in for purposes of calculation of EPF will be considered as part of basic pay, but this has not been implemented. Okay, it's a triple A scheme, which means at the time of investment you can take ATC benefit. At the time when you get the interest, which is 8.25% handsome interest, there is not taxable. Okay, only when your employee contribution is more than 2.5 lakhs per annum employee contribution, then beyond 2.5 lakhs अगर जो amount का contribution है उसका interest के ऊपर taxability है. That's come lately 2021. And the withdrawal is also non-taxable unless you have more than 50K of withdrawal, less than 5 years of contribution. Otherwise, if that's not the case, it's the best particular savings scheme. Although the government has made the new tax regime so lucrative that all this ATC business has become irrelevant. But anyway, I have to teach you. The EPS is basically the EPS 95, minimum 10 years of contributory service. So does not mean continuous, it means contributory and attaining 58 years of age. You can take reduced pension from 50 to 57 years, 4% reduction hoga, but you must have completed 10 years. So the 10 years condition is mandatory, but attaining 58 se pehle you can. Okay, and you can also defer it beyond 58 uh, for another 2 years and get 4% extra, whether in service or superannuated. Now, there are various types of pension, and the most common pension is superannuation. Okay, so superannuation pension is the most important, the most common, and in the case of demise, the widow or the child pension becomes the more important one. Okay, so superannuation is the most common pension. So, like a person like me, I am an EPS member with superannuation. Now, as far as pension calculation is concerned, that's pensionable salary, the average of last 60 months salary multiplied by number of contributory service years divided by 70. So if you have 35 years of service, okay, at PF wages, which is 15K, because pensionable wage is the PF threshold wage or the PF ceiling wage of 15K, and you have 35 years and 15K all in the last 5 years, you're crossing 15K, then 15,000 into 35 divided by 70 will give you 7.5K per month as pension. This pension, this contribution to the EPS does not earn any interest. The contribution to EPF earns interest of 8.25%, but not EPS. Okay, pension once it's fixed will not get changed. Okay. uh, So I will move on. Doesn't matter. Now, as far as EDLI is concerned, this is an insurance benefit in case of demise to the nominee or the legal heir. The min max amount is 2.5 to 7 lakhs based on your compensation. Okay, minimum is 2.5 lakhs in case of death. Now, as far as 12% is concerned, as I said, 12%, 12%. We all know 12%, and this particular contribution has been revised in the chapter on employee provident fund. So currently the 12% employee share goes to EPF and earns interest. The 12% employer share goes to partly to EPS and balance goes to EPF. Okay. The EDLI contribution is what I have mentioned. It's a 0.5%. Actually, it's going to go up with a cap of 75 per month because it's on 15,000 plus admin cost, and EPF admin cost is again by the employer. So basically employer pays 13%. Now, please remember, I want to at this stage also introduce this concept of the PF ceiling cal the the ability of an organization to restrict EPF to PF ceiling wages of 15K, which means that it is not necessary that you have to apply the basic plus DA plus retaining allowance, whatever it is, at the rate of 12%. You can, with consent, restrict the calculation of PF, both EE and ER component, at 12% on the PF threshold wage, which means 1800 rupees, 1800 rupees. With the employer share, if the employer is paying, the employer can insist statutorily that it will not pay more than 1800 rupees. But in our case, since the way our comp structure is that the ER component of PF is part of our gross है तो हमारे यहाँ से ही जाता है. So most of us keep saying अरे PF ER component तो is part of my compensation only. So which is again not a very great idea. But I'm only trying to say that if ER and where organizations have ER as separate, it is not mandatory that the employer has to pay the ER component as 12% on basic plus DA plus more than the PF ceiling. The central government makes a contribution of 174 rupees to the EPS. You have the UAN, and this UAN is going to continue. Please remember this UAN will continue. Now, why I have introduced this 15,000 and 12% on 15,000 is also to give you that flexibility that आप जब कोड ऑन वेजेस के तहत अपना वेज स्ट्रक्चर फाइनल ट्वीकिंग करेंगे, रीशफलिंग करेंगे, तो प्लीज कीप दिस कंपोनेंट आल्सो इन माइंड. ओके, that is why I have introduced, that is why I am stating this again. So uh, uh, the UAN that you have currently for EPF is supposed to be the UAN also for ESI. Okay, and the ECR that you have for EPF today will also be the common ECR for ESI. मायने आप बच नहीं सकते. That is what I'm only trying to say. Okay. And the ESI is one department. I'm going to go to that. Okay, just let's wait for one more minute. So let me complete the major salient features of the EPF. Here, the PF withdrawal, I want to only say that the big PF withdrawal, so the composite claim form is there, or you don't need the attestation of the employer. But the big change that has happened is recently that if you are not in employment, then only 75% of your employer provident fund contribution can be withdrawn. Okay, within 2 months. Within 2 months. Okay, not 100%, which was the case earlier. And the remaining 25% is only after 12 months of continuous unemployment. Why? Because the government doesn't want an employee to get out of PF. Similar is the situation with EPS. Now the EPS withdrawal, not pension. So EPS में क्या होता है? You can get pension if you have 10 years and 58 years or reduced pension. But if you don't have 10 years, then you will have to withdraw that EPS and it will not get you any interest. Let mind you. So in if you have 8 years of contributory service and you have superannuated and retired and 58, then in that case you will have to only get EPS withdrawal. But EPS withdrawal is also after 3 years of unemployment now. It's also that the government wants you not to withdraw your EPS contribution if you are an unemployed, if you have become unemployed. Then there are partial withdrawals, and these have also been streamlined because there were about 13 categories of partial withdrawals or advances which have been merged into three. Okay, you need a 12 months contribution here. Then PF deposit, you know all this, the ECR, and I just want to mention that this ECR, the EAPF and the ESI are working on a common ECR and a common UAN. Okay, uh, then I'm not e-nomination, ये सब तो ठीक है. Okay, so you now another problem that has occurred is of course for finance people where FC and FC payments of EPF have to be made now. Double payments, two payments are not allowed for a particular wage period. So that's a big problem. Please remember that after 1/9/2014, if a person has joined with wages more than 15,000, then and is not a member of the EPFO, then the entire 12% will go only to EPF and not to EPS. So that person cannot be a member of the EPS if your wages exceeded 15K. Now, here also courts have held this is arbitrary, and I really don't know what will happen now in the revised chapter. What will happen to this kind of a situation? Will they come up with some date where they say if after this date and this exceeds, then they will not be covered? I really don't know. So that confusion will continues to be there. Please remember the PF threshold wage was revised from 6.5K to 15K in September 2014. And I want to also caution you that this particular threshold is likely to be revised. So please don't hasten into taking action. Our understanding is that this 21K for ESI and everybody has started working, 42K तक तो नहीं लगेगा, ESI में नहीं आएगा. Okay, so I want to only say that this 15K and 21K may become a standard 25K because the government wants coverage of social security to be as universal as possible. So again, I'm with a disclaimer, again I'm saying this is something that we are hearing, and और आंख मीच के काम नहीं करना है. Okay, you don't have to just do something for the sake and then redo it after 2 months. That is why I am cautioning you again and again. And we already have very little resources, very little understanding. So we have to be more judicious with all that. Annual filing, ये तो है. Inoperative account or dormant account, if there is no contribution for 36 months, okay, 3 years, then you will not get interest. Or if you have not moved your previous membership ID balances to the new membership ID for 3 years, after 3 years, that amount will not get any interest. And after 7 years, it will go to the senior citizen welfare fund if not withdrawn. Okay. But up to 58 years, interest will be paid. So please have clarity in terms of inoperative account or dormant account, what it means. Sometimes from the previous member ID, 2 years we were not in job, third year we came into the job, we did not transfer it. After 3 years, the interest stops. And there's such a lot of problem in terms of moving. So what it means is that the moment you join a new employer, then ensure that the same UAN continues and the MID, the MID balance is shifted to the new MID. Okay, that's all. Now, as far as the ESI Act is concerned, basically it's a self-financing health insurance scheme. Now, this was for notified areas. This has changed. So the ESI Act was for notified areas. The ESI corporation and the government notified areas, which means it was not across India. This ESI Act and ESI facility is now going to be pan-India in all districts of the country. Now, as far as ESI is concerned, I have mentioned that there was ambiguity regarding applicability to charitable institutions, so to establishment. Okay, charitable, medical, and recreational institutions were covered, but not otherwise. Okay, and therefore we were always saying ESI not applicable because the word establishment in terms of coverage of ESI did not cover charitable institution as such, but covered only charitable, medical, and educational institution. This is managed by the ESI corporation and it is for 10 or more employees. अब यहाँ ध्यान कर लीजिए कि 10 or more employees अगर आपके पास हैं और आपने वो 42K का कॉन्सेप्ट भी लगा दिया है ना, और कहा कि none of my employees now will get under ESI, will as an organization after crossing 10, will you need to get registered as an institute, as an organization within the LIN? The answer is yes. All employees working for more than, ये सब ठीक है. Okay. Now, in the case of employee state insurance, please remember that employee ka applicability for purposes of threshold was not basic plus DA plus retaining allowance, but was gross salary. Gross salary, okay? Gross salary of 21K. Okay? Uh, they were all mandatorily covered, and the remaining, people uh, can be covered through just like you have discretionary bonus, discretionary Mediclaim scheme. But people whose gross salary is up to 21K were covered by mandatorily under ESI. Now, the word gross salary, please remember all these words are going to change and get replaced with the word wages. Wages. Okay. So that word wage will have no difference in interpretation. Now, okay, if your gross salary were to go beyond 21K, then once the contributory period, which is a 6 months period, till then you will continue. But once the 6 months period, where I have mentioned here, those contributory periods are get over, then you will be out of the ESI network. The contribution is 3.25% employer and 0.75% of gross wages of the employee. So 4%. 4% is the total dent. Now the 4% is on the wages. Now coming to uh, again online offline challan, the returns yearly, just as you have EPF return 3A 6A, you have half yearly returns, and I think they will keep on continuing. Continuing meaning these returns will become part of the single digital return. But these all these tables from the the return of contribution, which is half yearly, you are paying, you're going to go there. And if you don't fill it up and you still have more than 10 employees, then उससे ज़्यादा और मतलब it's like telling the blind man, I mean, whether to know or not to know. Registration is required. Benefits. Now, benefits are quite a few. There is medical benefit, which is the inpatient, outpatient treatment at ESI dispensaries and hospitals. And of course, the coverage is going up. Drugs, supplies, diagnostics for not only the person but his family through the identification. Sickness, any medical treatment and attendance and absenteeism, they are entitled for sickness benefits. Maternity, please remember that if you are under the ESI Act, then the Maternity Benefit Act is automatically subsumed in the ESI coverage. In the ESI coverage, the maternity benefit is automatically subsumed. Disablement, both permanent, temporary. ये सब explained, these benefits are explained in detail in the ESI chapter. I am only mentioning them. What is permanent and what is temporary, what the entire list of what is considered as permanent disablement is a schedule in the in the code. Dependent, if a person because of demise, some monthly pension, okay, uh, this is due to employment injury or occupational disease. Now, employment injury or occupational disease is generally covered by the Employment Compensation Act. But if you are covered under the ESI chapter, then the Employment Compensation Act does not apply. All situations of occupational injury or occupational disease, employment injury or occupational disease, and the word occupational disease has been defined very detailed in your occupation. What are the diseases that you will have and what will be considered as an occupational disease which will be within the coverage of ESI on your occupation, that has been specified. Funeral benefit in case of demise. The MB Act, I just want to say that the MB Act is also going to be part of the code, Social Security Code. That's a separate chapter. Most provisions in the MB Act 1961 are retained. Are retained. In ESI, what has happened? This notified area business. क्या क्या हो गया इसमें change? Every establishment is covered. That's number one. So nothing, no confusion. Notified area is replaced with across the country. Gross salary is replaced with wages. And I want to again caution you, don't just fix your head on 21K and 15K. Please see outside. Okay. Please be careful. Please keep monitoring what are those thresholds going to be. Because in EPF, the rate of contribution in EPF has been revised in the employment EPF chapter from 12% to 10%, which means indirectly the government is going to increase the threshold. Okay, so समझ लीजिए. Now the MB Act is basically the same, 26 weeks, 8 and 18 weeks, prenatal, postnatal, basically for motherhood, uh, maternity period, up to two children, 10 or more employees, 80 days of work in the past 12 months, 12 weeks for more than two children. If it's up to two, then 26, more than two, 12 weeks, adoption for child less than 3 months, again, 12 weeks, then 2 weeks for other things like, female sterilization, other periods for miscarriage, MTP, and there's an additional 1 month in case it's certified by a medical practitioner. Same thing continues. Crash facility, again, 50, a strength of 50 per office, okay, and two nursing breaks. Now, if I go to the Maternity Benefit Act or Maternity Benefit chapter in the SS code that we will see, most of these have been retained. Now I come to the Payment of Gratuity Act. So we have tried to see what is the current position and what is it that is probably changing. And tomorrow at 2:30, I'm going to take you to each of these SS code ka chapter to then say from where we are today in terms of our understanding on the various acts to our understanding on the provisions in the various chapters, not acts. Okay, that's how. The applicability is to establishment with 10 or more that is being retained. Okay, this shall be the eligibility is 5 years of continuous service, and continuous service is interpreted as 4 years and 240 days for 6 day working and 4 years and 190 days for 5 day working. And for the 1 year period, pro rata is also there, which means 120 and 95 days. That provision has been retained. In case of death, permanent disablement, the 5 year waiver of the 5 year rule, that is also there. Okay. So the 5 year continuous service as 4 years, 240 days, 4 years, 190 days, depending upon how many working days per week, that is retained. Similarly, the calculation is retained. Last drawn salary, not retained. It's not retained. The calculation is not retained. Why? Because it's not last drawn salary. It is last drawn wages. Okay. It is last drawn wages multiplied by number of years multiplied by 1526. 1526 they have retained. Month as 26 days, and 1 year and more than 6 months rounded to the next year, less than 6 months rounded to the previous year. Gratuity ceiling, they have said the ceiling will be announced, but as of now, we know that this is 20 lakhs for private and 25 lakhs for the central government. Now, due for payment within 30 days, contribution 4.81%. I don't think there is any change, but this 4.81% will be of wages, because when you will have to make payment of gratuity, that payment of gratuity will have to be made on wages. So this calculation of how much gratuity to pay, how much gratuity to contribute, both will be based on the new definition of wages. And the SS code, this new definition of wages will change the way we will have to factor the SS benefit, and we will have to be very smart. Now, the funding or insurance of gratuity liability. So we know, most of us know that there is gratuity liability getting funded. Okay, insurance through an insurance service provider, and this business is going to thrive because in the new code, the insurance of gratuity liability is mandatory. You cannot make provision of gratuity in your books and leave it at that. You will have to get it funded mandatorily. Taxability of gratuity, I'm not getting into. So that's a specific thing. Now that closes uh, our understanding of. Uh, I'm putting off the presentation. I have a huge task in terms of how many questions that have come. Okay, so my very clear point at this point of time, the key takeaway, and tomorrow when we will do the session, very important it is, I'm telling you, the OSH code and the ACES code. OSH code is all new because there's only one law that was, even that law was not applicable. But there is a whole bit of change in the way we will work with this word called contract labor. So we will have to visit our categories of employment, or what we call as various ways of. We will have to work in terms of First, the classification of employees as far as employment is concerned. And that is what I'm going to tell you tomorrow. All this business of new flexi hiring is going to change the way your employment categorization will be. So all this word called consultant and contract will be something which the inspector come facilitator in our reporting is going to create problems for us. So please don't think everything is going to be very easy. So the key takeaway today is that I have tried to tell you that what the code on wages acts which have got subsumed were, and what changes happen with the new code on wages, and especially our understanding on what the definition is and how it has to be interpreted. Then I have told you all the provisions of the code on wages. Please go through each of them. You need not, you must look at your own comp elements in your structure. You have to work on the concept of total remuneration, and you will have to, sit down and do your math. Now, this particular code on wages, the wage definition, in many organizations, the wage definition has components which are different for different geographies. There is extra complication there. Suppose the HRA in this is this, special allowance is this and this, A category is this and B category is this. All that has to be understood. If you are giving group mediclaim, group personal, term insurance, whether you will treat it as an exclusion, whether you will treat it as a perquisite, what will happen to medical allowance if it is reimbursable, what happens to medical allowance if it is fixed. As we said, if something is fixed, it should be an inclusion generally. If it is variable subject to reimbursement, should go to the exclusion, the right hand side. But you must start working on your field staff compensation structure, your office staff compensation structure, your geographical dispersion of wage structure, if that is the point. Then we had gone to the SS code, and I said four of the major laws that come get subsumed into the SS code. And the current situation in the terms of the EPF, the ESI, the MB, and gratuity is what we had seen very quickly. I mean, I'm not assuming that many of you, most of you know that. So now, please revise today, and tomorrow when we meet at 2:30, I'll go straight to the SS code. And the WC is fairly a new code and has a lot of responsibility free of cost to the employee. So there is incremental cost on occupational safety, health, wellness conditions as far as the OSH code is concerned. That we will see tomorrow. And then there are two slides which have the key takeaways, and those are the most critical ones that you will have to see each one or each sentence there. Okay, and then if time permits, we'll do the SS laws. So I first will go to the questions very quickly. So can you elaborate what the registration means? Basically, you will have to get your registration of your organization on the Shram Seva Suvidha portal and get a LIN just as you get your income tax ARN, or you get your PAN or whatever. Uh, can you please elaborate on 8 registrations earlier converted to one license? So you had the ESI, the EPF, those registrations have all been converted into one registration. As far as license is concerned, it's the license under the Contract Labor Regulation and Abolition CLRA. That is the license that. So the license is if and when contract labor. If no, then no license, only registration. And all existing registrations get subsumed under the LIN. Okay. Uh, आप जाके देखिएगा श्रम सेवा पोर्टल. Okay, I'll not give you existing returns, but we will see that tomorrow. We are having ESI, EPF, and PT registration. Need more understanding about Shram Suvidha portal. At this stage, please do not do anything. Please wait till the time that there's clarity in terms of getting your LIN and all of these will then be deemed registrations under LIN. What keynotes to be maintained when we give the consultancy? So the consultant is for us, given the professional qualification, that is what is consultancy, and for a short period of specific assignment or for a certain period of time assignment or time based, uh, not to replace an employee and not to be a deemed employee, not to become a deemed employment category is what you will have to see. Uh, Again, I want to say that this consultant and contract category is what is going to be replaced with the fixed term employment, FTE, which we will say tomorrow. Uh, Performance linked incentive being part of paid on quarterly basis, paid on performance is included in wages. I don't think, because these are variable compared to fixed. They will be part of uh, 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 they will be part of commissions in a certain sense and be excluded. Will medical allowance, mobile allowance will be covered in exclusion? Again, as I said, if medical reimbursement or mobile reimbursement, I think they will be more in the nature of exclusion. If they are fixed, irrespective of work, then they can go to uh, inclusion. Communication allowance is part of retaining allowance or exclusion? It's not part of retaining allowance, it's part of exclusion very clearly. So I want to no, communication allowance is not part of exclusion at this stage. Clearly, it's not a part of it. Again, communication allowance, as I said, is mobile allowance. In that case, if it is a fixed allowance, it can be considered as inclusion. Again, I said there is where there is no clarity in terms of where a particular allowance which you have as a nomenclature falls in inclusion and exclusion. Apply judicial precedents and also apply the principle of fixed versus variable. Mm, is in performance based will be included as kind of commission under exclusion. Retainer allowance is seasonal. Retaining allowance means I want to retain you, but I'll not ask you to work. That's what is retaining. Extra payment made under additional responsibilities, staff can be considered as wages inclusion. Extra payment made under additional responsibilities. No, no, whatever your extra responsibilities is part of your contract, which says extra additional responsibilities will be given, but your definition of wage or your wage will decide wage and the inclusion. Okay. Extra payment, so additional allowance for additional work, I don't know whether that is a category of element of your compensation structure. I really don't know. It should not be, but it should be part of your special allowance if it is variable compared to considering the work, then of course it will be an exclusion. Extra payment made under additional responsibilities. I don't understand this, but anyway, what I can say is that extra work under your employment contract is extra for the same wages. But if there is something called extra payment, additional allowance for extra work, and it is linked to work, then probably it will be exclusion. Wage period means that is the period which is considered for for purposes of o- opening day and closing day for payment of wages. This generally is a month. So the PF also will follow the wage period. Okay. TDS doesn't follow the wage period. TDS follows its own TDS rules under the Income Tax Act. Okay, TDS is TDS under the Income Tax Act. So you have the monthly deduction to be paid by 7th and the quarterly returns by 31st, whatever of the next month. That is what is TDS. I'm talking of TDS. TDS of staff is also TDS under the income tax. It's not part of Social Security. So which are authorized, will it also be part of? PF will not be part of it. TDS is part of the compensation only. It is only deducted based on the taxability and deposited, which is part of your wages only, which is going to be part of your wages only. Is leave without pay considered a deductible deduction from wages? I really don't know. So we'll have to see leave without, yeah, absence, yes, yes. It will be a deduction because absence from work is specified as a deduction. Okay. More than 15 days, you will have to see. I'll share the code. Please see the deduction on account of absence from duty. What are those provisions? They will guide you. Payslip, please look at some of the draft rules. You can look at the Delhi draft rules or whatever rules where you can see the payslip format. It's not different from our payslip. In fact, it may have less. Should we make calculation and assessment of our current with effect from as rules notified and check cost impact? I think yes. The rules notification, which will take another about 2 months, will only mean that your your calculations and your structure that you want is something that you have now frozen, because once the rules come out as final rules, then you start working, it will become too hectic, you will not be able to do. So assuming the 21/11/25 and whatever clarity there is, please start working on that. The rules, once they are notified, the final state rules or the central rules for implementation of the labor codes and the state rules on the code on wages for your respective state in which you have jurisdiction, that will then be an additional check to see there is nothing else that has come up in terms of explanation or additional. That is what our suggestion is. What key points should be considered while hiring a consultant? Oh, so consultant, if I can tell you, consultant is not covered under the labor codes. Okay, there's not no word called consultant under the labor codes. Consultant is a word that we have coined for attributing any services which are in the nature of professional services or technical services, and it's more to be governed by Section 194J of the Income Tax Act, not by the labor codes, because there's nothing like consultants का कुछ deduction होना है. Consultant is only covered under 194J for purposes of TDS. Other than that, there is no social security benefit. In fact, consultant is not recognized as a category of employee under the labor laws. What about the employees who are not covered under ESI? Will compensation act be applicable for them? Yeah. So basically, the Employee Compensation Act will be applicable. Will ESI Act will be applicable for employee compensation in case of occupational injury, provided you are registered. Yes, it will be, even if it is beyond the threshold. If any NGO is not registered till now in ESI, but after this new code they get registered, can there any? No, I don't think there's a challenge. In fact, the ESI department is going to various organizations. I heard they are going to various NGOs and now telling them that, well, the ESI Act is applicable. So I think you may have somebody from the ESI department coming to you, because they now need to register more and more establishments. Some of the employees who are not covered under ESI will compensation. I think the Compensation Act will be applicable for injuries and occupational disease. But I will do a double check and let you know. I think they should be covered because it says that if, uh, and we'll see that the applicability of employee compensation chapter in the SS code, it says that if your establishment is covered under the ESI chapter, then it will be excluded from the employee compensation chapter. But I will have a look at it and come back to you tomorrow. Is EPF will be applicable? Consultant is not an employee. What will be the status of full-time consultants? There is nothing called full-time consultant. Okay, a full-time consultant is actually a deemed employee. If we have not provided gratuity to contract employees who have completed 3 years of service so far, will there be any complications? So the idea is gratuity is to be applied for employees, not uh, if you have categorized them. So understand, if they are contractual, okay, there is something called contractual engagement, something which is an employment contract but with a fixed term. Okay, then if they have completed 3 years, and if there is a provision of fixed term for that contract employee, then they are fixed term employees, and they will be covered for gratuity. So our idea is that if you have had contractual employment which is from year to year, then the applicability of the fixed term employment chapter provisions might go retrospective and even cover their earlier periods for purposes of gratuity. Okay. LTA is not a perquisite. LTA is and LTA and leave encashment are uh, part of exclusions, J and K. GHI and GPA insurance can be considered as perquisites, or they can also be added to exclusion. Is there a percent apply of PF withdrawal when you are on employment? No, then PF withdrawal when you make that, that is against partial withdrawals for specific reasons. The three categories I said. When I'm talking of withdrawal of PF, then I'm saying when you are not employed. Can we reduce the PF contribution from actual to to the threshold? Exactly, you can do that, and that should be one of the points that you should consider. But you'll have to get consent and all that. If an employee was on break and worked for half month and deceased, will they be eligible for gratuity and EDLI payout? Uh, please see how many days work is required both in gratuity as far as in EPF. If an employee was on break, so if the employee is a member of the EPFO, then EDLI he will definitely get. As far as gratuity is concerned, then the gratuity will be available because the 5-year rule doesn't. Both cases, gratuity and EDLI, Udaya will be applicable. ESI is that means for who are charitable that those I only explained, Shashi, to explain to you that up till now ESI was applicable to charitable, medical, and educational institutions. Now that distinction is over. Please throw more light on gross salary, gross remuneration, CTC with clear numeric. I have done that. I have told you what gross salary is, what we are looking at. The total remuneration is basically the CTC that we normally talk of. So there's nothing like a CTC. Now, this gross salary, gross remuneration, total remuneration, and CTC, there is only one word called remuneration or total remuneration. Let's look at it like this. And all other elements of your that you talk about as terms of basic, they are all part of your total remuneration. What's an ideal wage breakup after that? I can't tell you. Uh, Krishnanand, you will have, and I can tell you in the code on wages is so peculiar that you will have to, because this is getting implemented not as day one. It's not today that we have started employing and giving. So every organization will have to look back, see calculation, see the math, see what that structure is. I can tell you the code on wages, the government is not even asking you to change your wage structure or the elements on the wages. They are only saying that you will have to prove that your exclusions are not more than 50%. Even if they are more than 50%, your social security benefit will have to be on 50%. Even though your exclusions are 50% and you don't change the elements in your compensation, doesn't matter, but then it comes in has more complications later on. So it's better to rationalize the compensation structure in line with what is the definition of inclusion, exclusion, and the wages, so that we are clear and are able to, you see, it's not just we have to explain to each employee and the teams basically what this all means. This is the next big challenge. Okay, so I can only say that there is nothing called ideal structure. You will have to first revisit your structure and come up with the most optimal structure where balancing take home, extra cost because of CTC, extra CTC, taxation, and the exclusion. All four things are taken together. Is gratuity applicable to consultant? Kitni bar? No. Does this code change according to the state? The so the labor codes have substantive provisions. क्या मतलब होता है उसका? That the provisions that have been laid down in the labor codes are the the what the why of those labor codes is left to the states, but the what cannot be undermined. You cannot supersede the what. Okay, so the state rules will only lay down the implementation chart. What is applicable to Karnataka state? Matlab, what is applicable to Karnataka? Does this code change according to state? What is applicable? No, no. So you please wait. Look at your Karnataka. I think Karnataka did its draft rules for all the four codes. I think the fourth code, the IR code, you don't have to bother. But the rest of the codes, the if the old draft is there, you still look at the old draft. If the draft rules have been pre-published, then you look at them. Uh, will voucher pay or clock hour basis resources be considered as voucher pay? I don't even know, Bide, what this voucher pay is. You can write to us separately. Can you please format of the wage slip? I will not. I will only ask you to go to some of your own. So Meenal is from where? Meenal is Meenal. इज फ्रॉम समर्थन. तो सुनो, एमपी का जो ड्राफ्ट कोड है ना, कोड ऑन वेजेस, उसमें जाके देखना फॉर्म फॉर फॉर्मेट फॉर पे स्लिप. होप टू आंसर. City compensation allowance is part of retaining allowance or exclusion. So the retaining allowance I have explained to you. City compensatory allowance should be considered as part of exclusion, as a component under conveyance allowance. Is leave encashment mandatory? So, Joby, we will come back to you. Now, under the codes, leave encashment and annual leave is mandatory. But earlier, whether leave encashment was mandatory or not was dependent on the Shops and Establishment Act. Now, encashment of leave, you will have to comply with not only the OSH code provisions on leave encashment, but also the state-specific SNDA Act. Uh, m- so the overtime pay mandatory instead of giving compensatory off. So compensatory off is separate. Compensatory off doesn't mean compensation. And we will see compensatory off provision in the OSH code. Overtime is at this stage, I will say, while EL needs to be there and is also part of the state SND Act, which are not repealed. Please remember, central government has no power to repeal the SND Act. So the SND Act will be there. Some of the BJP ruled states are now wanting to subsume the SND Act under the OSH code. पर वो तो सब political है. But overtime pay जो है अभी, please hang on, because the overtime pay tomorrow I will tell you provisions are essentially applicable to worker. Is NGO perspective In NGO perspective, what components are advisable to have? नहीं बताऊंगा. I will not. You please go to the definition of wages, to the sample template, to the illustration, and tomorrow I will show you the same illustration in terms of the compensation. Are separate challans required for FC funds? चालान्स तो सेपरेट होगा, वो तो बना ही सकते हो, बट पेमेंट एक होगा. Okay, that is the big problem, and therefore how do you make that adjustment? That is an adjustment that finance folks know. Okay. No Ben, you are into finance, this is needs, and so FC funds and local funds challan can be separate, but the payment has to be same, one payment only. That cannot be separate. Is performance based pay will be part of wages? Since performance based pay is variable, it will be part of exclusion. While we are talking about exclusion, like for variable components payment, will it be part of calculation of 50? Yes, since it's in exclusion, you will have to see exclusion does not exceed 50%. More explanation on inclusion. You see, in 2 sessions, I can do only this much justice, otherwise we'll have to do it in 4 sessions. I can do that also, but is any of the revised codes that we need to act immediately? I said tomorrow I will answer this question also. Pankaj, if performance bonus is part of CTC, then it will be considered while. So if it is part of CTC performance bonus, which is variable bonus, then it will be exclusion for 50% calculation. Do we have to start paying the gratuity for FT for duration we have engaged them? Um, so the FT provisions are gratuity. So listen to me. The FT provision is gratuity, and that FT is a new category which is now clear. So we might have had FT in whatever, कॉन्ट्रैक्ट एम्प्लॉयमेंट जो बोलते थे ना, कॉन्ट्रैक्ट, एक तो हम बोलते थे रेगुलर एम्प्लॉय, जहां पर कॉन्ट्रैक्ट के अंदर डेट मेंशन नहीं है, एंड डेट. एक होता था एम्प्लॉय यूज ऑन अ कॉन्ट्रैक्ट, दैट एम्प्लॉय ऑन कॉन्ट्रैक्ट व्हिच हैड अ फिक्स्ड डेट इज व्हाट इज कॉल्ड एज एफटी. Now, if that FTE contract has 12 months, that definitely will be entitled for gratuity. My additional point that I am making is that if that employee was already in the form of an FTE from prior years and has already completed 12 months, the 12 months period will be counted retrospectively. And the 5 and the 6 months and the 1 year is, of course, condition is already there proportionately 190 240 and 95 120. If we hire resources on contract basis, uh, should be considered as an employee. So Anaga, I will answer this question tomorrow when we will do contract labor and the contract employment of contract labor in core activity, which is our activity for our organization, is prohibited. But we will do that. uh, Overtime applicable. George, I just want to say, please do not apply this overtime. The overtime provisions are part of OSH code, but when we are reading the overtime provision in the OSH code, the word worker is coming instead of employee, and that's what is creating this confusion. But the compensatory of without compensation, because the person has worked on a weekly holiday or holiday, is something which will continue. Should we mention the gross remuneration, the appointment letter? Yes, वो तो होना ही है. And the appointment letter template that you will find in the various state rules, draft rules, clearly has. बहुत हो गया. We pay conveyance to the employees as per actuals. Can that also be? That is reimbursement. Okay. That is travel, and that is booked under travel. That is not employee compensation. So please remember, is that part of employee compensation? Is it part of their compensation structure, or is it part of the discharge of duty? Okay. And therefore is not part of travel. If it is part of remuneration, then if it is fixed travel allowance, then it will go to inclusion. If it is reimbursement based and still you have included it as part of your appointment letter, then definitely yes. What is FTE? Earth Accounts is asking what is FTE. So उदयपुर आके ही बताऊंगा मैं. But tomorrow I will tell you what is FTE. Very clearly, I will let you know what is FTE. And the, just right now, I want to only say that the appointments made as contract employees, not contract workers or contract employee labor. If contract labor, then there's a separate thing. And therefore, tomorrow when we will do classification of employees, जहाँ NGOs क्या करते हैं, वो सारा झमेला, and that what is going to stop all this is something that we will do tomorrow. I will take you all through that and then leave you to decide what you want to do. Okay. So I am not the authority to tell you do this or not do that. Anyway, so with that, I've completed the questions on chat. Thank you very much. Thanks for your time. Thanks for your patience hearing. And I am extremely happy that uh, all of you being part of the not for profits is what I'm trying to address. I'm not giving you a lecture. I'm giving you this as very clear direction as to how to think as a not for profit. None of these slides is something which is not relevant. Every slide, every sentence is relevant. That's what I want to say. Thank you very much. Have a great day, and I see you at 2:30, same time, same hygiene, and same Zoom link. Thank you very much.